I'd like to reconvene the Budget Committee and take a few moments now to discuss through some of the questions
You guys salute the flag this morning?
and
No, I don't
keep
think
that in
we
mind.
did. Jeff, we got.
We did.
We didn't, yeah, we
What is with this outfit?
So,
just didn't think of it.
Yes.
order of business, we'd like to have the administrator to kind of talk through what we've got here from a handout standpoint.
Yeah, so I'm always amazed and impressed with the kind of turnaround from our budget staff and department staff in putting materials together to respond to questions and requests for more information from the board. So there's quite a bit of material here for you. I hope you feel they are responsive to the things that you've asked for in the preceding week on that. Now, we do have representatives from Business and Community Services here because I understand that there's an interest in being able to share some additional questions with the staff from that department. And then my understanding is what we would be able to do is have a bit of a conversation about how to proceed with arriving at what would be a conclusion and decision about the county budget.
Thank you. Do we want to take a few minutes and just kind of look through the questions we received back, or are there
Would it be
some
possible
additional
for Diane just to run
questions?
through this really
Yeah.
quickly?
Just to
I mean, just
summarize a
quickly,
little bit,
summarize.
summarize a little bit of
Yeah,
what
I
we've
love
received here?
Executive brief summary.
I can
Fast.
summarize quickly.
Fast.
There's nothing new in this packet that you haven't received in the barrage of emails that came to you. I've organized them in the same order that the tabs are in the book, and on the front page you can see what page to begin on. But other than that, nothing's different. It's just a compilation in printed form. Did you have any particular questions?
No, that was a good summary. Thank you.
That's exactly what Tom asked for.
Brief, that's it.
Met all my criteria. See, it worked out well, right?
So how come we can't spend that $22.4 million for the bond money? I know the answer to that.
Other than radios, you mean?
Yeah.
Don, I have a question about that bond issue. Are we gonna run into an arbitrage problem? Okay.
Is there an answer to that question, or
No.
is there not? The answer
Oh,
is
we said
simply no.
we're not anticipating any arbitrage problems with the bond proceeds.
Does everybody know what that arbitrage issue is?
I do.
Okay, good. I just thought there might be somebody in the audience that may not know.
Would you like to have the Business and Community Services folks come on up? And
We've got no ringer.
no ringer. Oh,
Ringer, you know, you run them through the ringer.
Oh, that.
Well, can I, let me,
Put a W under that.
let me kind
Order
of
of-
broach,
Well, the chair has a hammer there.
let me kind of broach, the context of what, the point I was trying to make, Thursday, towards the end, and, a little bit today, and actually during the lunch, myself, Tom, and Don were in line and just kind of made trying to make the point that what's not clear is that the ending fund balances, whether or not they're free or available or tied or have a purpose in like today's cases, some of those are dwindling down and being used up. It doesn't really give you an accurate picture of what the real needs are in the end, because we're pulling those down, and you really can't look at whether it's a maintenance level of budget accommodation for the day-to-day or the year-to-year, that is, or the general fund contribution, however it is, because you're actually using that, and because you're not monitoring that amount of money of burning down those contingencies or that carryover, you don't get a real sense of what that real budget is, other than the accounts that are already at zero, like carryover, like the tax assessor's office. So, and it's not clear in the budget sometimes, at least on the very back page, which has the graph and everything rolled together in aggregate, what that carryover or ending fund balance or beginning balance, wherever it's placed, what that is tied to, or whether it's available or not available to, or what its purpose is. And in essence, last year, you may recall, I added all those numbers together, and I think, just out of recollection, it was about $28 million. We were going through that, and our contingency and reserve policy combined, I think combined for about 22 million. Is that about right, Don? 20 million?
It's, yeah, there's about 8.5 in contingency and 8.7 in contingency and 13.5 in reserves. They're in the general fund. It's important to remember, though, that roll-up that you were talking about isn't just general fund. It
I know
involves
that.
a whole
I'm-
host of
yeah.
restricted funds, and what you really have to do is you have to take a look at each individual fund with each individual department to better understand the circumstances that would drive what would be an ending fund balance that would become part of a beginning fund balance, and then look at the budget proposal for the coming year to see then what happens to the funds that are there, the revenues coming in, and then the planned expenditures. So, for example, there were some questions last week regarding business and community services, regarding the timber program and the property disposition program, in terms of the size of the reserves that were there. And those are two very different kinds of programs with two very different reasons why there are reserves. So, for example, in property disposition, the reserves are there in order to help manage over time what may be the cost of running that property disposition program. And anything we might pull out of reserves isn't available to be able to be used on other county programs and activities. It's got to go back to the individual taxing districts. It's not money that's available. In the case of the timber program, the proceeds of which are intended to both support the management of our 3,000 acres of county forests, but also to have what would be sustained, ongoing funding to support our county parks, so they aren't totally reliant on what would be general fund support, knowing that we have something on the area of some $4.8 million worth of deferred maintenance and repair work that we need to be doing with our county parks over the future. In my mind, that's not money that would be prudent to make available and to redirect to other kinds of activities, because we're only going to we'd have to be looking at the general fund in future years in order to pay for operating costs and also to pay for repairs. And I'm just describing those because they're two very different circumstances. You go to the sheriff's office, for example, and you see the ending fund balance that's there. That's part of our plan to balance the sheriff's office budget for the coming year, is that we would actually have some ending fund balance programmed in, so we have a beginning fund balance for this coming year in order to maintain current capacity there. So every one of them is different, and you can't, I know, you can't just sort of roll them up and say we've got $28 million there to make available.
I'm not suggesting that. If I can finish my point. And
Sure, okay.
I want to make sure we're concise, and by having this conversation, we're losing the point I'm trying to make, and that is that we established a long time ago the 5 and 10% contingency, so we know what that is, and they're all different that's understood. So my point is that if you take the 28 and you add the 22, that's about $50 million in reserves, which is great. I mean, that kind of shows health, okay? But the point is that we ought to be able to be aware that there is that additional 28 on top of the 10, 15%, okay? first of all, and knowing that some of those are dedicated and each case is unique. We can't afford to talk about all of them here today because we have so many different budgets and programs. So my point is that when I look at the last one, I forgot what it was. Maybe it was the disaster plan. You know, it was 50%, over 50% of what was carryover was more than double or half of the general fund contribution. Is pretty significant. So while other budgets are at zero carryover, and like the tax assessor, they're living on that, doing a pretty good job of balancing that. And the other unique thing, like the clerk and the justice court, they actually give revenue back. So you have three different type of models in here, if you will, examples of where you have excess general fund, you're bringing back into the general fund. You have some, again, I won't repeat them all. But it ought to be noted that without being able to monitor, again, my point earlier, without being able to monitor that the health of those accounts that are bleeding that down, we really don't know what their true, it's hard to see from a snapshot or even what's in here, what their true health is on a long-term strategy. So what does get them to, it's a philosophy how you account for it and how you budget for it and how you actually see the whole picture, which is my point. And I'm sure that not everyone's following me. I'm going to ask the administrator or maybe Tom, if you maybe explain it better if I'm missing the point, if you're following, because I would like someone, I might want to make sure everyone's understanding what I'm trying to say.
I'll take a try.
Okay,
So
go ahead, thanks.
what I hear you, Mr. Krupp, saying is that these contingency amounts in the departmental funds budgets are not considered reserves because, in large part, what we've heard, and I mentioned this morning, the departments have plans to spend them. That's not a reserve. That's a carryover. It's a contingency. It's not even a contingency when you know you're going to spend it. Contingency is not legally meant for things you know you're going to do out of it. It means for something is unforeseen. And I think what you're saying is this is money in addition to what the county has reserved for some extraordinary event down the line that has no plans to spend absent disaster or whatever. And I think you're both right. These are extra funds in the different departmental budgets. But what I see, and kind of what we talked about, was a lot of the departments, and like I said, I didn't keep track as they were up here, but they're spending into these amounts. And these are one-time occurrences. Beginning fund balance, you know, if you have $100 left at the end of the year, you can spend that once, but you can't spend it $100 for the next 5 years for, 5 new positions. So if you're going to maintain this level of service level we've talked about, it's going to cost the general fund, or you're going to have to cut services probably fairly soon, because there's a lot of ending fund balance being used to fund ongoing operations in this document. And I'm not saying that's bad, but it's not fiscally a long-term healthy thing to do. So I would look at this budget as possibly a transition to dealing with those issues. And you've got other things, like, I'll just give you my list as long as I've got the mic. You've got federal cuts. We've heard about state of Oregon cuts. We've heard about the asset management plan coming online. You've got huge facility unfunded obligations that I'm not even sure we're aware of. I mean, to some extent we are. Transportation needs, and even the risk reserves came up. So anyway, I think,
So what's the point is the question. What is the point?
What?
the point of
The
what?
question or the comment?
The point I was trying to make, and I think Tom captured it, is that it's hard to actually, my point is it's hard to understand the real health and viability of that and what that real long-term stability is, or what that looks like when you know you're bleeding down an unseen or not very visible amount. So if we're going to say, if we're looking at our total budget at the end, in the aggregate, we say, oh, that looks pretty darn good. In reality, what is really good is a bleed
Maybe-
down.
maybe not quite as good as you
Which is
thought.
not exactly. It's
Right,
not,
but
it's not
maybe-
a reserve, it's a bank account.
Maybe that's something they can capture when they update the financial plan.
Well, and so that, now you know the reason why I'm not recommending to you
Well,
that
yeah,
we do any
exactly.
policy level proposals this year, is because we've got these uncertainties with a couple of key funds. Now, these, we're talking about are budgets that are not budgeted in the general fund, but rely on an appropriation from the general fund to make ends meet. And say in the case of disaster management, well, we're really talking about there for next year in order to maintain the current service levels there, we would need to appropriate about $500,000 of general fund dollars if we can't get it from somewhere else to maintain the current staffing and support levels that are currently in there during this year and the preceding year. So, and when I'm looking out over the horizon, not knowing what's going to happen with the federal budget, I mean, I hear that we may lose community development block grant and home funds down the road. And we don't know what we're ultimately going to see coming out of the state budget. And when I think about the demands that are out there for the things that we do and the needs that we have in the community, I mean, just, if I were to pick a singular important priority on my end of things, it would be trying to figure out how to put together sufficient enough resources so we could really get our arms around this issue around homelessness in Clackamas County. But we can't come anywhere near developing the kind of resources necessary to get ahead of that. And if we're losing our federal support for that, we're going to be even more difficult straits in that regard than we are today. So that's my caution for the Budget Committee this year, and why it is I'm not suggesting that we would be increasing or enhancing program capacity for this coming year. Other issue that lies out there that I want to make sure is on your radar screen is with the courthouse project. I mean, that is going to be a significant encumbrance, and we're going to probably be needing to ask for help from the public in order to be able to pull that off and take advantage of the state funding commitment that's there to be able to fund that capital improvement. On top of that, we know down the road we need a brand new juvenile facility. We've talked about the needs of trying to expand and create what would be a campus for survivors of domestic violence. We've talked about the need down the road of trying to replace the current jail with something more modern and more suitable for the current practices that are out there. We've got a whole host of things that lie out ahead, nowhere near the resources to be able to carry them out. So that's my concern. And I share your concern about these individual funds that are drawing down on what resources they had available to them in the past. So,
And I think the most important thing I wanted to say, and I tried to say this last year because I really didn't buy into the forecast, and we found out the forecast was way off, right? Is that we're not as healthy as we think we are. And so the things like the courthouse and all those big expenditures, as you cited, we're just not as healthy as we think we are as far as year to year to year. And I don't know what the future holds for us, but last year we were talking about all these things we could do, jail and all these other things, and so I'm saying we can't get there from here. There's just not the means to do that.
Yeah, but I disagree. I think we are healthy. The problem is we don't know what's gonna happen to us with the state and federal budgets. The county itself is in a good position, a healthy position. It is, there's no question about it. We have PERS, we've got money set aside. We're over $1 billion budget. The problem is we don't know what the state and federal government's gonna do.
Yep.
So the county itself is in good shape.
well,
I think we're all saying the same thing, actually, just from different angles. I think Don is cautioning us to be cautious and not add to ongoing needs. Mr. Chair, I still won't call you Jim from high school, but you're right. I mean, the county is healthier than our state partners and our federal partners, apparently, but this county still has unmet needs in the future. It's reason to be cautious. And I think you're saying the same thing.
Yep, exactly. And like my accountant would say, and he schooled me year after year after year because, my net profits weren't as ideal for the amount of volume of business that you do. You should have you make 5% on your gross, or you make 10% or 15, whatever those ideals are. When you're down at the margin of 1% or less, that's not a good thing. So I'd be really proud to say, hey, we're $1 billion enterprise. And by the way, we have 10% of that available for policy level proposals or for this, we're not that healthy. Okay.
No.
So from a business perspective, to do $1 billion worth of business and have zero for this board for discretionary expenditures or policy level proposals is not a great day. It's not anything to be proud of.
Not a bad thing either.
Well, you could be cutting. I mean, that's the flip
Yeah.
side.
I mean, from where we were 5 years ago, we're a
recession.
hell of a long ways ahead of that.
Yes, Eric. And then Commissioner Hubbardson.
I would like to say that I think going forward, I'm in agreement with Mr. Krupp in terms of not depleting our reserves. But I think what this county board needs to do is to really sit down and have some heart-to-heart and some real discussion about what our priorities are and what we can afford to fund and what we can't afford to fund. And I think there may be some departments and some programs that are cut because it comes down to a priority. And so I think one of the things I don't see is I don't see the Board of County Commissioners coming down with a priority. In other words, they put together this performance clackamas and they have these goals. And I was at a CPO meeting last night when somebody from transportation was there, engineering, I believe it was. And they're talking about reducing all of the deaths in the county. And I'm thinking, well, just as an example, we still have people that are texting. We still have people running red lights. In fact, we may have more now. And we still have people that are doing stupid things. So I don't see how you're going to reduce the death unless you have the sheriff involved in that too. And so those are the things that need to be decided at the Board of County Commissioners level. What's our priority and what is it that we can actually accomplish with the funds and the departments we have? And in some cases, if it's important, then the directors need to go back and rethink how they're going to approach something and maybe re-engineer something. That's what West did with regard to the digesters. They started out with a $56 million project, and they re-engineered and redesigned it down to 36. And I think that may have to happen among many departments within the county, because we don't have an increasing reserve of cash coming in, and the taxpayers, I'm telling you, are getting tighter, squeezed tighter and tighter every year. And so that's something that needs to be thought about. We don't have an unlimited supply of cash. And regardless of federal funding or state funding, I'm in agreement with Mr. Bernard, Chair Bernard, that I think we are in a very good position, and I would commend the county for that, because I think we're probably one of the best run counties in the state. But I think there needs to be some real soul searching and some heart-to-heart discussions at the county Board of Commissioners level about some of these projects and programs.
Commissioner Humberson.
To use an analogy, the income is sufficient to take care of the house as it is right now, but it's not sufficient to add a new room addition. That's kind of where we're at. And looking at a big picture of the budget, about a quarter of our budget comes from outside sources, the federal and state government in one form or another, and about 3/4 of it, $762 million, is local tax revenues. My concern is we don't know what the state and the feds are going to do. I mean, really, it comes down to that. And if they don't fund to our expectations, whatever reserves we have that are unrestricted reserves, we may have to be looking at to help, for instance, Health and Human Services, which is the department that's the most dependent upon those external funds and which service the most needy people in our community. So I'm pleased with the fact that we have a maintenance budget that does have reserves that that you stood up and you said no PLP this year, and for good reason from everything that I read. And given that, I'm prepared to move forward and take a vote on this budget. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Chair Bernard.
First, the county's goal, let's say, to reduce deaths on roads is to first address that concern with our employees. Don't text. We have a test that all employees were asked to take, and hopefully that will help. But if I think the transportation engineer will tell you that it's not our roads that kill people. People kill people. They're not paying attention. That we did in our discussions as a board talk about our priorities, and one of them is a couple of them are pretty basic. One is no one should be hungry in Clackamas County, and no one should be homeless. Two basic things. And the whole idea behind Performance Clackamas is that over time, and I don't know how much time we give it, maybe it's next year, we look at those performances and we see, well, you're not performing like you should. So you either need to re-engineer or invest your money somewhere else. And that's what I see performance measures as. But the other thing is that we have opportunities, for example, the courthouse, $70 million. We're going to have to ask the voters for every 1 penny, it's $1 million. So if our debt to pay, we have to come up with $70 million, we can calculate over 20 or 30 years how much money we have to raise to pay for that courthouse, and that's what we'll ask the people to do. Because, the other thing you look at when you're in government, I look at is what's the return on investment? Because we don't have enough courtrooms, families have to sometimes wait a year before they can get their support payments, to get into court to get their support payments. Or veterans, like Paula a number of years ago pushed for a veteran service officer. Now it's how much? 10 million a year that is generated from veterans.
Oh, it's more than that, per all the benefits they bring back from the VA. Yes,
I heard
it's
it was
significant.
10 million last year, I think, recently. So those kind of things are great return on investment. The other thing we're trying to do is we're talking about childcare on campus, which would not be free. They'd have to pay for it. But if it attracts people and keeps people here longer and reduces traffic, that's another thing that's really positive. And that's the way I think we should look at everything. What's the return on investment? And I think we're really trying to do that. I mean, juvenile justice, there's no better investment. And I think the transition center, there's no better investment and than the things that we're doing. But I think that's what we're really trying to do. And I'm hoping that everyone will be done with Performance Clackamas, and we will have some that have 3 years, maybe even 4 years of experience. 3, and that's when we really dig into it. Next year, we should be able to dig into policies and programs.
I'm going to comment back to Commissioner Bernard's comments. I totally agree with you. Return on investment is important. But as we go forward, I think what you need to be careful of is that we don't focus on treating the symptom and not the cause. And homelessness is a symptom, it's not the cause. As one example.
Yeah. Well, like jobs, whether they have jobs or, yeah. It's true.
Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner Schrader.
I think it was Commissioner Schrader first.
Was she? Okay, we'll go. Commissioner Schrader.
We've kind of gotten on the subject of veterans, and I just wanted to make one concern because we have been talking about houselessness, and I think that housing veterans has been a priority of ours for a while, and I do share a concern about one line item on human services, and that is the Housing Vets First funding by the general fund. The budget request is $250,000. They were approved in 15-16. They expended $84,000 with a carryover $165,000 into this current year. And this year they are expecting to fully expend the annual allocation. And my concern is, I haven't really seen any deliverables at all for the money that's been spent on. So if we're going to be doing I don't know where that there is with that. Was not given any information that indeed there was a concrete deliverable that a veteran got housed, and where did the money go, and how was it spent, and so to me, just this one particular piece I'd like to get, I'm prepared to, move forward on the budget, obviously. I'm not going to have this hold up the budget, but these are the kinds of things that we need to be looking for, that if we have a program, Performance Clackamas is supposed to have some concrete deliverables, and I'm not sure we've got a deliverable on this one. And when Commissioner Savas talks about money allocation, if there's no deliverable on this, why are we funding it? Why don't we take it and use it for something that we actually are working towards a concrete deliverable? So, just a comment.
Thanks. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, so, and I think that's a great segue, Martha, because, I know that we're a couple of years away from having the MFR, Managing for Results, strategic plan in full development. And at some point, getting back to points that have been made by this budget committee and prior, is that where's the county headed, and what do we want to accomplish? And having an outcome-based budget, or at least having the resources to achieve some of those outcomes. I know Eric spoke about that several times, and I agree about that. And so the issues about the current status, crisis, I would call it, that being the homeless and the people that are hungry, that's certainly something we're trying to deal with, and that is a symptom. It's a symptom of a greater problem. How many resources do we have available today to put towards those? That's those, and then what are we doing actively, and what are we telling our departments and administration? This is really important. We need to put these people back to work, for example. Maybe that's one of the causes. It's one of the contributors. Is maybe employment. And people can look at the employment number now, was it 3.7, and say, oh gosh, we're doing a great job. Well, you actually drill down on that stat, you find out that there's a lot of part-time jobs in there that don't support families, that it's their jobs, and the employment rate's down, but they're not, the gross income isn't adequate to support a family. So those are the kinds of things I think we ought to be focused on to get the county pointed in the right direction. I thought about how to approach today. And we could go and say, oh, we can pick this account or look at that account and bundle up some money. But Jim, yesterday, before at our mid-break yesterday, asked me, well, Paul, what do you want to do? If you found some money, what do you want to do with it? That was a great question. Maybe that's the way to, using the way we used to do it when Steve Wheeler was the administrator. We would say, geez, Steve, we want to get this and that done. Go find it. Okay? Remember that? Jim remembers that.
And Leininger, I want $1 million.
Go find it. And then let the administration go back and pick through all these pages and everything else and say, you know what? That administrator's budget's got some extra resources to do that. But, so my response to Commissioner Bernard is, well, I think one of the things that came out of this is that resonated with me was maybe having the resources for another auditor in the treasurer's office. That'd be one thing. The second one is that we know that we're working on this veteran shelter that we approved some money for last year. We might be able to do a similar thing for a women's shelter. We might need some resources for that. Those might be in DHS. I don't know. We don't know that. But maybe that is the shortest way to the end of closing out this budget cycle, is that what do we see as priorities that we want to fund that are needy or have needs that will accomplish something, and let's not get into the weeds of how we find it. Let administration do that.
Okay. Commissioner Bernard?
So one thing I thought in Gary's budget, he had one new employee. I don't think he should hire that employee because we're getting a divorce. And I think it's a challenging time. I assume, that was in the Parks District. Yeah. I don't think they should hire that employee. That's one thing that, and I don't know what that employee was. They never mentioned it, but, I somewhat agree. Oh, I know. This is one thing I'd love to see as a guide, You know, affordable housing, the last project we did was $278 a square foot. There's other ways to do affordable housing, and we have assets that we are selling. Gary has, actually, it's not Gary. Dan Johnson has money in our Clackamas Town Center Urban Renewal District that could support developers that develop properties at a much lower rate and continue to pay property taxes. That's the kind of focus I'd like to do on future development, because the reason it costs $278 a square foot is because you give up 60 years of property taxes. And you've got all these partners that are giving up taxes. But if you did a project that, for example, there's one being considered at the Johnson Creek Park and Ride, which is really underutilized. There's one being considered. There's a developer who's willing to develop it, needs help on a road. There's urban renewal money to do it, and that project will actually pay property taxes. There's no request for property tax reduction. Those are the kind of investments I think we could make that won't impact future generations who have to give up their property taxes to do that. This Petcore project is 60 or 70 years of property taxes given up. That's a long time. So those are some priorities I'd like to see. The next few projects with near Clackamas Town Center should be projects that the developer pays property taxes.
Yeah. Well done.
Thanks. As we've been going through these last few days, I've been making notes for myself. To remember to turn my mic on. Now, on kinds of things that we may not be able to, in fact, I didn't figure it all, we'd be able to solve today, but that I would like to suggest that we look at them long term. So like our quarterly budget meetings that we have, it's a great time to find out where we are with the budget at that point in time, but I would like to also see that be, we had this issue, we delved into it, and here's what came out of that. And I just, I just want to share those thoughts that I had. And one of them, of course, is to, in general, how do we fund the departments that have those diminishing beginning fund balances? That's huge. We need to address that. Also made a note about houselessness, that maybe we figure out a plan how to work with the cities throughout the county on a variety of residences that are affordable for various income levels, and beginning with a housing analysis and the projections from that. Also, a strategic plan on how to improve and keep up with our facilities maintenance. If we don't do something with our facilities, it sounded to me like we're going to be in as bad a shape with facilities as we are with roads very, very quickly. And I don't want to see that happen. And we can't, because then it's going to cost us more to keep those up to date. And the other thing that I made note of for myself, and I hope some of the rest of you agree with this, is I would like to try to figure out how to free up dollars within the sheriff's or juvenile or something somewhere, so that the schools do not have to be funding the school resource officers. It's kind of like we pay taxes, which go to the schools, and we pay the public safety levy, and then I know there's the LED, and that's different and all that, but it just seems like, as important as juvenile is in our county, and as much emphasis as we put on it in other ways, that I would hope that there would be a way. It's probably about maybe close to $400,000 in what the schools currently pay for the various SROs. So that was the other one that I wrote down that I'd like to see some additional discussion about. Thank you.
Tom.
I would just like to echo what Will just said about using our quarterly meetings to chunk off some of these larger issues, especially the issue we're talking about, the use of ending fund balance for so many departments. If we can maybe get that quantified at a quarterly meeting and sort of a glide path to next year's budget. And then I would like to add to that list that Wilda mentioned, the sheriff's office. I think there's still some issues about staffing and overtime that the sheriff has prepared information for, but hasn't presented and we haven't discussed.
To discuss that,
Right.
that report that we got.
Exactly,
Not
yeah.
just get paper.
Thank
Got it, yeah.
All right, thanks. Commissioner Humberson was next.
Quickly, the quarterly would be a good place for what Martha was requesting to occur also. It's a good time for departments to simply give us a quick rundown on deliverables. So if the question is, how many veterans have we housed in the last year or the last 3 months, we ought to be able to have a quick answer to something like that. And it doesn't have to be long, detailed reports. It ought to be a quick number. Those kinds of things shouldn't burden the staff with long, detailed reports, but rather just, this is what we've been able to accomplish with the funds that you gave us this quarter, period, end of discussion.
Commissioner Bernard, next.
Oh, I just wanted to add in C4, we talked about a housing need assessment. Milwaukee did theirs and one other community did theirs. Wilsonville did theirs. That's something I'd like to get an RFP out and get some idea what it would cost to do that. Because some of the cities are willing to contribute. And some of them, however, will probably pass their budget process by the time we get that price. But based on population, the cities could contribute some monies to that needs assessment.
Yeah, it's really great information you put there too.
Eric.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Wilda said, and I'd also like to add, with regard to the sheriff, I think there needs to be some thinking out of the box, because a large part of their overtime is incurred in training, and it seems to me that you may need to just rearrange where and when the training takes place, so that all the officers are there at one time for the training and you don't incur all that overtime. Maybe at the beginning of a shift or end of shift, I don't know. All I'm saying is that I think there's a lot of thinking out of the box that needs to happen with regard to the sheriff and many of the other departments, so that they come up with something that's efficient. If they have a desire to do something, think outside the box. How can I solve this with as much or less resources?
Wilda. Oh, yes.
Wilda,
Wilda.
yeah,
Okay.
Wilda's first.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric, and to add on to that's a great idea, but that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping at the quarterly meetings, we can have some in-depth discussion about, that microphone's gonna be the death of me yet, that we can have some in-depth, and to do that, I think it's gonna take us more than the 2 hours that we set aside right now for our quarterly meetings, because we already get a lot of information that we still would want to receive, or at least, maybe in some ways have shorter discussions on that. I'm not sure. But I would want to know that folks are willing to expend 3 hours if we need to, so that we can really delve down into things and not just always get the surface look, the 30,000-foot look, that we have more opportunity to help brainstorm solutions with perhaps obviously with the department folks that are there, or suggestions or something. So that's all. Thanks.
Commissioner Savas.
So as we talked about earlier, as far as the accounts that actually generate revenue, that feed back into the general fund, and those that are flat, and then also those that have diminishing ending balances, we have I think, potential for a couple cases maybe where the opposite is true, where actually there's either a trend or opportunities or situations where maybe that could grow. And going back to BCS, whether it's the forest timber management aspect and revenues that could be generated potentially, that if things turn a certain way, that there will be more money generated, there will be a policy wrapped around about what's retained for operations of parks, for example, and what would be a policy of an excess that would be come back, such as like in elections and justice court, that would come back to help balance that. Property disposition is another one where maybe there's a potential that there more revenue could be generated. And if it goes back to the tax rolls at all the taxing districts, that's fine, because something to all of them is better than nothing, right? Because what other means or what other purposes would those funds be for when it hits a certain amount? What is that threshold amount where you say, okay, at this point we turn that back? Those are policies that ought to be embedded in there so we don't repeat this dialogue budget cycle after budget cycle.
So if I may, the kind of thinking you're suggesting there is similar to the kind of thing that we've done with the Justice Court in terms of the distribution of revenues that the court generates with respect to the sheriff's operations, resolution services, juvenile, and our Safe Communities program. That kind of thinking is embedded in just that sort of thing. Resolution services is also an area where they've been exploring, trying to figure out how they may be able to make that asset that they have, that skill and capability, a place to be able to generate income to help support many of the other things that they do in the department there. I was going to say too, I'll tell you, when I think about the health of the general fund, of course, the general fund is that part of the budget that we have the greatest amount of discretion and opportunity for exercise of judgment. Probably the single most important thing that we could do this year, and I suspect this would fit in right with everything everybody has already said, would be to see that the sheriff's office undertake an earnest effort at performance management under Performance Clackamas. I think that would get to the heart of the issue that you asked about, well, thinking out of the box with respect to how do you go about doing training. It would also get to the heart of the issue about the use of overtime and scheduling and those sorts of issues. So I do think one thing that could come out of this year's budget deliberations that I think could make a significant difference for the future, given how much of the general fund is devoted to sheriff's operations, is to move forward with asking the sheriff's office to participate in that effort.
I think we would agree with you.
Yeah, and we did ask him.
Yes.
Right.
And he answered. But that'd be a good update for the quarterlies too, just keep track of that, so, yeah.
Commissioner
Let Eric go
Or
first.
Eric, okay. Eric, go
Oh,
ahead.
just to follow on what Mr. Krupp said, is that, that's going to become increasingly important as we move closer and closer to renewing that operating level, that law enforcement levy. You're going to have to go back to the tax or the ratepayers and say, this is what we did with the money you got. Do you want us to continue? And if you've got nothing to present, you're going to have a hard road to sell that levy.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Humberson.
I was just wondering if the chair was prepared to accept the motion at this point.
There's one written on your agenda.
Not sure I have that document
I
in
can
front
do
of
it
me,
if
but if
you'd like
somebody,
to call on
if
me.
Mr. Feely has it, please feel free.
I have one question for Diane. You mentioned, Diane, you had three changes to the proposed budget this morning. Do we need to formally amend it to accept those before we do the motion to approve the budget?
No,
Okay.
if you move to approve a budget as amended.
amended. All right.
That's why I read it into the record too.
Okay, all right. I move that the committee approve the 2017-2018 budget for Clackamas County as amended and impose the maximum county permanent tax rates, the maximum public safety local option levy tax rate, and a rate of 10 cents per thousand of assessed value within district boundaries for general obligation bond debt service.
And I will second that.
We'll all second that.
Call for the question.
Oh, you're calling for the
Anything?
question already?
Anyway, anything? Any conversation, any debate,
Let's go.
conversations, questions? All right,
Call the question.
let's call then for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
No.
All opposed, any opposed? Yeah,
And I'd like to say something about that if I could.
Sure, feel free.
For 3 years, I've basically heard the same story from public safety, so that's where this is coming from. First, I would just like to say it's been a pleasure to be part of this 17-18 committee, and I really mean this. This has been completely enjoyable. My hat's off to Chair Bernard for this. And as usual, the presentations in front of this board reveal the hard-working, diligent, and professional staff that continue to find avenues to fulfill their mission despite limited resources. However, there's one management group that continues to regale this committee with awards, national recognition received along with accreditation. But when asked, what is the current plan for public safety issues in Clackamas County, we receive glib answers. Commissioner Savas pointed out that Clackamas County is currently ranked second among counties in this state for fatal car crashes. We learned there is no plan to address this serious public safety issue other than to refer to the motors unit, which only works or primarily works during the day. Instead, we heard there are more cars on the road, thus more congestion and more crashes. In 2003, and I think I talked about this the other day, there were no smartphones and marijuana was not legal. The deputies at the sheriff's office wrote over 20,000 citations and arrested many DUIs with a population at that time of approximately 350,000. Today, with smartphones, legal marijuana, and with a population well over 400,000, we are at historic modern lows for DUI enforcement and citations. Apparently, there is no plan, not even the mention of a plan, to send the word to patrol deputies to step up traffic enforcement in light of these statistics. When this public safety issue was brought up to the sheriff by elected officials, the response was to write a scathing letter basically stating they are money grubbers for the county, which couldn't be further from the truth. When the budget committee made comments regarding school resource officers and how important they are to the rural areas of our county, not to mention the other areas, the best part of the sheriff's return comment was that he would like school resource officers in middle schools. No mention of a plan to put them there. I'd like to hear a plan. When asked about bad neighbor marijuana growers affecting so many rural neighborhoods in the county, the sheriff in so many words said there's nothing he can do. My question is, so what are we to do when somebody's running up down the street shooting guns, carrying concealed weapons, and the deputies show up and just make phone calls to that person? The sheriff said he's on a maintenance level budget. Everyone in the county is. We've heard this time and time again. But this budget doesn't stop him from shifting priorities or finding ways to do more with less, such as the district attorney and other Clackamas County managers do every year. And I'd like to bring your attention to what we heard from Juvenile Department today. How do we utilize our existing resources and increase partnerships to address unmet needs and service gaps to achieve better outcomes? What a great sentence. An example of this would be the sheriff's studio that is scheduled to drain over $400,000 in personnel costs this budget cycle. Frankly, I don't care about that studio. I want people out on the street. I want boots out there enforcing our traffic laws and the marijuana guys. And Commissioner Salvas was right. Take the marijuana out of this. They're just bad behavior, period. And I hear it from all the CPOs, or many of the CPOs. Finally, the sheriff is very proud of his department's accreditation, which must cost substantial tax dollars, although I don't know how much. I can't help but wonder if this accreditation really means anything when one considers the detective who failed to investigate many serious alleged crimes since 2009. Despite working through several evaluation cycles, he was allowed to continue ignoring his duties until he was allowed to retire in good standing. I don't understand how our department was reaccredited. I really don't. Sheriff, working towards national or local awards and other accolades isn't a bad thing, but they mean nothing to the families of the victims who have died on Clackamas County roads, or to the citizens of Clackamas County who have to deal with bad neighbors who want some uniform presence at their schools without having to pay double taxes.
And if you're questioning that, just think about that. We pay property taxes for the schools. We pay property taxes to the sheriff. Why do the schools have to pay again for a deputy sheriff? That's the question I have, and many people in Colton have. Finally, there are many types of heroes. Today I recognize Clackamas County's Sergeant Swanson as one of the bravest of its heroes. I cannot in good conscience vote to approve this 17-18 budget for Clackamas County. Please count my vote as a no. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Okay.
I just want to, I'm sorry, I just want to bring attention to this. You're going to find this on page 67, and it talks about traffic stops. And there's many ways to spin statistics, okay? There's people on motors, good deputies on motors that ride motors and try to enforce traffic laws, okay? That's what they do for a living. They make traffic stops every day, all day that they work. So the self-initiated, traffic stops are self-initiated physical or self-initiated activity. These traffic stops are included in this statistic. That doesn't mean anything to me. I mean, other than I'm glad that the motors are out there. I'm glad they're enforcing the traffic laws. But what about at night? Think about that. That's what Eric was talking about. So, thank you again. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, and thank you for your service on the board. We appreciate it. I think at this time,
Do we need a
I
motion?
would just like
all the
to
business
express
of
my
this point.
thanks to all of you. We've been meeting for a week and a half, pretty much. Very intense, a lot of detail. I just got to say, I thank you for your commitment, your energy, and your passion about making sure that we devote our rare and endangered county resources to doing good things for the citizens of Clackamas County.
Thank you.
And-
Thank
and
you, staff.
I'd like to add also that
Well-
you guys have done a yeoman's job in putting information out. Particularly Diane has worked so well and her staff
Her
to get
two
this
staff.
information to us. And I really appreciate that, big time.
I just wanted to add, it's amazing to me that Diane and her two staff people can actually do this. I mean, I've worked in budget offices with a lot more people, so it's pretty phenomenal. And thanks to Don and Laurel for bringing this to us in just really good shape and making it fairly easy.
I also just want to it should be obvious, but our volunteers on the budget committee who have put in all this time for this entire week and all the other meetings we've had and all the studying over the holiday that you all did, it's a tremendous commitment, and I am very grateful for your indulgence and your ability and time effort put forth on this. As Commissioner Bernard would always say, we're ready to double your pay.
I thought maybe you'd give us more lunches or something, if I may. There you go. Especially if we're going to meet 3 hours, right? It's always amazed me how much work product the staff puts out, and all the departments too, when they bring information to us. So I thank you for that. And quite frankly, what I hope that we can be, and what I would like to see us be, is a group that helps find solutions and not just looks at issues, but be solution seekers. I think that's our job.
So I just want everybody to know I've memorized every page in this book. No, that's only kidding. But I just want to thank all of you for your hard work, because I've been doing this, as has Jim, for quite a long time. And I think this is one of the best budget cycles that I've ever been through. I think Performance Clackamas is making a huge difference. I think the quality of the work with our volunteers has just been really out of this world. And I'm looking forward to those quarterly meetings, which I don't, so some meetings I don't look forward to quarterly, but this is going to be really good to have all this expertise. And thank you, staff people, for all the work you've done. How you help us succeed despite ourselves sometimes.
I just want to add, I, of course, thank you very much. This is my first budget as chair. It was very enjoyable. I think we had some great conversation, and I look forward to doing this in the future. No, there was one other thing I wanted to say. Dang it. Went right out of my head. Besides, Kurt needs a new picture. Well, you know, some of those ideas that came out at the very end about housing, about some of the things you mentioned about the sheriff's budget, I think those are all things we could address in the next budget meeting.
Oh, absolutely.
And, well, I'll think of it later, tomorrow.
Send us a
Very
note.
good.
Yeah, thanks.
Send us an email.
Yeah, I
We're
will.
used to getting them.
I'll tweet you tonight about it.
3 a.m.
We'll look for that tweet.
That's okay.
It'll be huge, huge.
You need a motion to adjourn. You just need to adjourn.
I want to thank everybody. It's been a pleasure serving for the years on the committee, and this year it's been a good experience, I think, for all of us as we've gone through this over the years.
Oh,
And I don't know if we'll let you say you're coming. So with that, we'll entertain the motion, I think.
I just
If
want-
you'd like
After
to.
I just want to
After
add,
Jim's
you know, it's
comments,
always
to adjourn.
terrible when you have money. When there's no money to spend, the budgets are always a lot easier.
That's true.
I think 2 years ago was a really tough budget because we had money.
yeah.
So, thank
So
you.
we thought,
Yeah.
okay.
Motion?
I move to adjourn.
We move to adjourn this budget cycle. Second? All in favor? I think we are aye. We're adjourned this year.
No.
Thank you, everybody.